welcome everybody to another essential conversation here with Dr. John McNeel. John is a psychologist from Los Angeles, California, and I'm inspired by this man, and I'm trying to get through introducing him here, but I'm just really happy to be here, accompanying him in this wonderful share that we're going to do today. So today we're going to start to explore what Dr. McNeel explains as a concept called the three worlds. The names he gives these worlds are survival, emotional, and practical. These three worlds, as he calls them, exist in relationships that are based in affection, choice, and commitment. That sounds amazing. Most of our lives are spent in what he calls the practical world. You know, going around our daily business and engaged in the practical pursuits of life and with other people. Then we have the survival world that can appear at any time as a representation of a sudden medical emergency or someone that we dearly love is in hospital or in danger. Then we have the emotional world, which is when we engage in this world, it's those people whom we have started an emotional commitment with. It's a level of vulnerability. John will explain how this concept is a crucial tool in helping people repair and enrich their relationships that are based on love and choice. Like, love and choice, isn't that a wonderful way? So if anybody's listening here who would like to orientate from this place of choice and love, then make a cup of tea, put the feet up, and lean towards the screen, as I'm sure this is going to be very beneficial for your relationships and your future self. John, thank you.
Thank you. So I'm going to talk about this concept that I call the three worlds. And I use the word worlds because they're like, when you think of a world or think of a planet, well, it's a separate entity. You know, each of these are three separate entities, and there can be some overlap, but and you'll see as I talk is that they're separate entities because what is demanded by each of these three worlds is very different from each world. And so what takes care of the survival world doesn't take care of the emotional world or practical world. What takes care of the emotional world doesn't take care of the survival world or the practical world. And sorry, fellas, sorry, but what takes care of the practical world doesn't take care of the emotional world or the survival world. Just as you can hear a groan in the audience because guys are like, no, if I just get everything done right and fixed up right, then the emotional world should be fine. I want to share with you how I came upon this concept. I have, for the last 30 plus years, conducted groups for men, mostly men, who are diagnosed with type A behavior. I trained with the founder of that phrase, Dr. Meyer, Friedman, and I was a member of his institute for a long time. And so in working with these successful people, very intelligent, very well read, I noticed that they were just really great to have around if there was an emergency, that they were terrific if there was a practical problem to solve or something that needed to be fixed, but they could be stunned into speechlessness if their 15-year-old daughter was upset. And so I began to play with these ideas that there's a survival world and that there's, of course, a practical world where we work 9 to 5, we go do our work, we make our house payments, we pay the rent, we do whatever is necessary to make life go. But there was another world that I came to call the emotional world, where you have a different tone of voice, and you have a different vocabulary, and you have a different goal. So let me show you let me show you this visually. I put a line connecting these three. I'm not sure the line is necessary, but you see the three boxes. Those are the three worlds. And as Nigel said in the introduction, that this concept is relevant to those relationships that at least were originally based on warmth and affection and love, commitment and choice. This material doesn't have very much meaning for a 13-year-old who's had been forced to marry a 40-year-old man. There was no involvement of the emotional world in that decision. So, and in that group of people, and this can be either our intimate relationships, people we're married to, our children, our parents. Of course, we didn't choose our parents. I'll come to that. And our closest friends, because that is the setting in which the emotional world exists. And as I'll talk about later, the emotional world takes a great deal of work. Some people say, well, I have 100 friends. I have 200 friends. Somebody on their Facebook said, oh, I have 2,000 friends. I'm sorry, but no one has 2,000 friends. No one has 200 friends. Nobody has 100 friends. You have a lot of acquaintances that you like and enjoy. But when you get into the realm of friendship and committed relationship, you're talking about a very small group of people, because the emotional world takes a lot of vulnerability, a lot of availability, along with vulnerability, and it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of intentional modifying of one's behavior and voice tone and all kinds of things in order to make it work with that other person. And so what I noticed about all these type A folks, great folks, good folks, is they didn't know how to handle or what to do when the emotional world was present. Okay, let me show you a few pictures I put together. Just kind of a visual representation of these three things. So I've just put a few pictures together just to represent the three worlds. All right. So first we come to the survival world. And by the survival world, I mean when there is a medical crisis or something is going on that if it is not corrected or responded to, either death or dismemberment or some kind of serious after effect can take place. And when the survival world is there, most of the time we know it's there. This gentleman right here is clearly looking like he's having a heart attack. That's and when someone's having a heart attack, you drop everything else and you act. And that's appropriate in the survival world. And I have a lot of stories, unfortunately, of people who the survival world showed up and they said, oh, it's just heartburn or it's just something else. And they postponed taking any action. And it ended up either with them having severe damage to their body or they ended up dying. And so just to give you a few, this is, it's an urgent world. It's a world that very often involves, 911 telephone calls or because you have to have somebody. If the survival world is there, you need somebody on scene who knows what to do in that world, and knows how to take immediate action. I always give the example of, if you're having a nice dinner and grandpa, chokes, you don't say, oh, don't tend to that right now. Wait till dinner, dinner's hot on the table. It's like, no, the dinner goes on the floor if necessary, and you take care of your grandfather. And, it's an action world. That's what characterizes it's an action world. It's very focused. It's very intense. Physicians have a saying that's a little slightly blood curdling, but the saying is, all patients stop bleeding one way or another. And when the survival world is present, there will be an outcome, and you want to do everything in your power to make it a good outcome. And I'll say more. Now we come to the emotional world. And again, see, when I put those up there, survival world, emotional world, and practical world, that is, they are in a hierarchy. All right. And remember, you only do the emotional world with people you are deeply devoted to. Or you might do the emotional world, you know, with someone who's obviously stressed for a few minutes. I remember sitting next to a couple of people on airplanes, and someone had just died in their family, and they were very upset. And I happened to be good with that sort of thing. So I tended to them as if they were someone I knew and cared about, because I know how to do that. But as soon as they got to their destination, they ran for their families. They ran for the heart of where their emotional world was, without looking back, which was just fun. So we got to, you know, this is a world that involves the emotions, and it's very different from the survival world. And the reason it's second in that hierarchy is because in these relationships, devoted, choice, warmth. So obviously, when the survival world is there, you respond. The survival world requires immediate recognition and immediate action. No recognition could be tragic. Lots of stories, people walking around with heart attacks for 36 hours, not recognizing. In these warm relationships, when the emotional world shows up, it's next down in the hierarchy. And the deal there is you need to be able to recognize it. If you don't know this, most of my guys, they didn't have anything in their head that said, oh, the emotional world is here. They pretty much took a practical world approach to emotional problems. So it's being able to say, oh, it's here. Just like, you know, you get that phone call, like, oh, we got to go to the hospital. Someone looks a certain way, someone gets teary. And suddenly you go, oh, the emotional world is here. It doesn't take immediate action because nobody dies in the emotional world. You may feel like you're dying. You may feel like it's your last breath, but actually no one's ever died of their emotions. But it takes immediate affirmation. Oh, it's like you make the other person visible. I see that you're sad. I see that you're upset. And you affirm that the person's having emotions. All right?
So it's John, it's like there's an affection or an empathy and a warmth and a love and a leaning towards and a accompanying and all these moving towards the other by bringing yourself, you know, in this sort of heart space towards the other person.
That's right. If you're not warm, you're not in the emotional world. You know, the guy who saves my life, the doctor who puts a hand into my chest and saves my life, it's not really important to me that he's just having the warmest feelings in the world toward me. What matters to me is he knows which artery to clamp off and what to do next. So I wake up. You know? So just some more images of the emotional world. It can be very sweet. It can be very intense. This is me with my daughter. We're letting butterflies go. Her grandmother's, we've just had the memorial service for her grandmother, my mother-in-law. And okay. And it's where we have conflict. I mean, if you're in relationship with someone and it's based on a lot of warmth, and you're going to be vulnerable, and that other person is going to know you, and you're going to know that other person, and it's going to lead to conflict. I tell people that there are loads of things in marriages or committed relationships that may or may not be there. You may or may not be sexual with each other. You may or may not have children. You may or may not go on vacation together. You may or may not sleep together. You may or may not eat together. All sorts of things you may or may not do. Some good, maybe some not good. But there are two things that you always have in emotion-based relationships that are committed, where you have a lot of contact with other people. And those two things are that you will share your life. You know, if you live with someone 24/7, or you're with someone in a very deeply emotional level a lot of the time, you will share your life. And I mean by that, you will share what is behind your personal facade, what is behind your public self, because you can't live for your public self in a committed, warm relationship. Your whole self will emerge, and the other person will know you, and you will have shared your life with that person. The second thing that you'll have is you will have conflict. Now, that doesn't mean you'll have knockdown awful fights or cold weeks where you never speak to each other. It means that you'll have conflict. I'd like to go eat Japanese. Well, I want to eat Chinese. I want to stay home. It's conflict. And conflict is the way in which we actually learn about each other, and we learn what the other person needs. And a lot of conflict is resolved very quickly. You know, other people, they get hooked on conflict because they think it's a solvable problem. It's at work rather than, oh, this is a process. Survival world is an action world. You have to take action. It's imperative. The emotional world is a process world. And once again, guys, I'm sorry, but when the emotional world is there, there's nothing to fix. I'll say that there's nothing to fix. This is very disappointing for a lot of people.
Yeah, I had this experience, John, about 3 days ago where I came home and my wife was emotional and I found myself galloping towards doing something to fix it. And somehow, by the grace of God, there was a slowing down and a regulating. And then what I did, instead of having to fix it, solve it, I just like moved towards her and says, I'm here. Tell me more, I'm here with you. I synced with her. I climbed down that step ladder to where she was and was just able to be there with her. But it takes effort to do that sometimes, John, because it's like you have to, I think it's a muscle that you have to develop over time.
It is, and you have to be able to resist what is intuitive. Look, all of us are like the old saying, if the only tool you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And it's like, so we pull out our tools. Well, this is about learning the tools of the emotional world. Now, I practiced in Palo Alto for 40 years. I've been in practice for over 50 years. Well, I'm in Palo Alto. For those of you who don't know, that's where Stanford University is. One of the greatest medical hospitals in the world is there. And the clientele that I saw were pretty bright. And they were pretty successful people in the practical world. Well, I'd say no one ever brought a gurney to my office and said, doctor, you've got to see this person. They went up the road to Stanford, which was a survival place. No one ever confused that, And in the same way, the people I'm working with, I don't know, in lots of measures, I reckon they're more successful in the practical world than I am. They didn't come to me to say, tell me how to do the practical world. What I did in my work, doing my work currently, is I'm a guide in the emotional world. That I know about the emotional world. I actually know how it works, and I know the language of it. And it's like learning a different language and not responding intuitively, because if we respond intuitively, for some people, when the emotional world comes up, and by the way, the emotional world is uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable. Especially if it's conflictual. But even if it's really, really happy and joyful and intensely cheerful, that's still a certain kind of discomfort. Now, the important thing is, remember, these are based on relationships with warmth and choice and commitment. So I chose this kind of discomfort. But I didn't want to have this discomfort. I just wanted to get married and be really happy and have my partner make me happy. It's like, well, that's swell. That has nothing to do with the real world, but it's swell. Okay? It's like, no, it's uncomfortable, but it's a kind of discomfort that we want. Having children. Well, some people are just crazy about having kids. And I got to tell you, having kids is really uncomfortable. Because, you get up in the middle of the night, all these things, you spend all your money on them, all this other stuff, you give them the time. But if it's what you want, it's a kind of discomfort you want. If you don't want to have kids and you get stuck with them, that's a pretty tough place to be in, because the feelings are not that rewarding. So it's important to understand that whether I knew it or not, this is the kind of discomfort I wanted. And the number one skill in the emotional world, the number one skill, is to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. The two pictures on the screen right now, they don't look very comfortable. They look kind of unhappy, and they look kind of estranged. And you wouldn't look at that picture. That is a really happy picture. They're uncomfortable. But if one of them is saying, yeah, this is really hard right this minute, and yes, we're really having a big problem right this minute, and this is a discomfort that I chose. And I'm comfortable with the belief that if we just stay in our process long enough and let our warmth come back to the surface, we'll take care of processing whatever needs to be processed, because at the heart of the relationship is warmth, because that's where it started. And when I see a new couple, and you only see, look, if you're a couples therapist, you only see people when they're really distressed, and they've been at being distressed for a long time. That title of the book, Paul Watzlawick's book, the title's great, about couples therapy. The situation is impossible, but not serious. Okay? Because that's how it feels. Yeah. If one of those two people in that picture right there can remember, we'll get through this. They will. Because at the heart of the emotional world is warmth. Now, when people come to me, I started to say, first thing I do is I see if there's any glimmer of the warmth that was there originally, because what they walk in the room with is usually the conflict, their unresolved conflict that's turned into a fight, that's turned into a standoff, that's turned into a battle of wills, and it's gotten pretty nasty sometimes. But I look for if there's a flicker of that warmth. John Gottman talks about this in his work. So he uses the image of a fireplace with ashes in it, but if you can find a live coal, you can build a fire again. If all the coals are dead, you can blow on it all day long and you'll get a face full of ashes. Okay. And it's where the emotional world is where the things that we dream of, not only being loved, but properly understood, it's where we get to give love. I mean, where we really get to open our heart to somebody and where we get to grow. And this obviously is one of the good moments, and that's good. That's good. Okay, now we get to the practical world. Well, it looks a little different from the previous pictures. I mean, practical world it's the world of practicality. Survival world is action. The emotional world is process. And being there. And being in the process to saying, we stay in this process long enough, we'll get back to our warmth. If you believe that warmth is there and you're in touch with your own warmth. Yeah, I'm really mad at you. And underneath of that, I'm really warm. And the practical world, what's it? Well, content. The questions. How much? How many? What time do we start? What time do we finish? What are the criteria? It's a world of negotiation. Quid pro quo. I'll do this. You pay me so much. It's a deal. Boom. Handshake. We're good. It's a world where you fix stuff. You can fix content. You need more content over here, less content over here. You can move it around. Survival world is a world of urgency. Of course, some people use practical world techniques when the emotional world is there. Other folks, as soon as they feel the discomfort that is inherent to the emotional world, they interpret as something terrible has happened and this has got to be solved right this minute. And they go into an action mode that says, we've got to stop this right this minute. And lo and behold, they're in the survival world, except it's not there. Other people, it's like, now let's just sit down and talk about this reasonably. I'm sure we can come to a good conclusion. That works great in a boardroom. That works really poorly in a bedroom or living room. Okay. So the practical world is a world that's pretty much not terribly emotional by its nature. I mean, if you work for a good company and have nice people that you work with, I worked in a building for 40 years in Palo Alto where I knew everybody by their first name and we were friendly and we were chatty. And I moved out during the pandemic and I've not seen them ever since, except my wife who's upstairs and one of my best friends who lived in the building, who worked in the building. And that's as it should be. There wasn't much emotional basis for the relationship other than we were proximate to one another. It is a world of work, which is good. Work is good. Practical, I mean, makes the world. So you have these three worlds here again in this order. And the thing that I emphasize and teach all the time is what takes care of the practical world doesn't take care of the emotional world. Because a lot of people consciously or unconsciously believe that if they just take good enough care, it's like the father who's sitting on the bed of his 13-year-old daughter who's sobbing her eyes out, and he says, "Why are you unhappy? You live in a nice home with all the things you want, and you have parents that love you. You know, how can you be unhappy?" The emotional world is not linear. It is a world of what is. Somebody says, "How can you feel that?" That's an incorrect question. Why are you feeling that? That is an incorrect question. There's no affirmation in those two questions. It's like, "Oh, I see that you're feeling. You look happy. You look sad." Yeah. But it's an affirmation of the emotion that is visible.
Mm. John, what I see in my clinic a lot of the time is, and I'm loving how you categorize and make it really simple here for the differentiation between these different worlds. And you know, sometimes I see people in the practical world operating in, like they're in the survival world. Sometimes I see people in the emotional world who are addressing it in the practical world or the survival world.
Mm-hmm.
And you had a lovely chapter. And by the way, anybody, just so you know, Aspiring to Kindness is John's book, and I strongly recommend it. It's been very inspirational, and I keep going back to it. But he has this wonderful statement that he has in the book, and it's he says, "Sometimes a man can be on a runaway horse and has a difficulty in stopping and listening attentively," which in my understanding is, if there's an emotional situation, sometimes we can gallop right past it and not be able to attune or connect or be available to the other. It's almost like running past a garden full of beautiful flowers and not taking the time to slow down and take in the beautiful fragrance and the color. You run right past it. And John, this is I think over your lifetime of working in groups and being able to see type A men in their approach towards emotions or their avoidance of emotions, how does someone go from being so practically minded or so survivalistically minded? How do they transition into smelling the flowers in a way, or entering into that?
You just asked one of the most important questions, because there are signals that when each world is present. But if you don't know the signal, you don't switch into that world. There's some people, the survival world is right there. They feel like an elephant is sitting on their chest, and they're like, I'll talk to somebody in a couple of days, if this is still going on. It's like they don't get the signal. Practical world, well, it's like, the bell goes off, tell us to go back to class or tell us to go back to the work situation. And it tells us, well, there are things that tell us that the emotional world is there. And they're more subtle, of course. So most of us can switch into the survival world. Most of us can switch into the practical world. The word is being able to switch. And so one of the questions you raise, though, or one of the issues you raise, Nigel, is how do you switch into something you really don't have a language for? I mean, I know that Chinese exists, but if you were to say to me, if you're getting right in my face and scream at me, speak Chinese, it's like I can say gung hei fat choi. I'm done. All right. I don't have the language for that. I could learn it. And so, but I am aware that Chinese exists. I know that I don't know it. And it's actually not important in my life to learn that language. But if I'm in a relationship where I really love somebody, then I have a real interest in learning the language of the emotional world, because that's where emotional issues are resolved. And so there are two things. One is knowing that there is this thing called the emotional world. You can call it what you prefer, but there is this thing called the emotional world. And the second is being able to switch into it. It's like Nigel used a great example. You can walk past the most beautiful garden in the world. If you don't see it, you don't stop and enjoy it. If you're focused on the future and what you've got to get done tomorrow, you can be in the most glorious setting. Well, in the same way, you can walk past someone in the emotional world. Somebody can be really distressed. More than once, I've asked someone in couples therapy, often it's the wife who's crying. And I'll say to the man, what's it like for you to see your wife in so much pain and to be in tears? Well, it's not uncommon for people. She tries to pull this all the time. It's her way of manipulating the situation. He's seeing it as a practical world ploy to get her way, as opposed to that is, he's not in the emotional world. He's thinking about it in some way that it satisfies a practical criteria, as opposed to, yeah. So, and there's something else that's very important to know about the emotional world. Woody Allen, the American movie star, famously, well, if you know about the saying, I guess it's famous, but said famously a number of years ago, that 80% of life is just showing up, just being there. That's 80% of life, Well, McNeel says, picking a statistic out of thin air, thank you very much, but McNeel says 97% of the emotional world can be satisfied by remaining warmly present and being curious. That is, it's like Nigel's example again, where he realized he got full of things. How do I fix this situation? And then realized what he needed to do was to sit down with his wife and be there. Easy to say, but if you've never had it modeled for you, and the emotional world is warm. I mean, it's based on love. It started out warm, and a familiar kind of thing. It's like, well, whose fault is it that the warmth is gone? His fault, her fault. Because I'm trying to think of this practically, who erred and who needs to correct. I'm not really trying to be that mean to my partner. I'm really trying to solve this problem, but I'm trying to solve it with the wrong tools.
Yeah, John, just yesterday evening, I had a session in the clinic, and there was just again, it was like, I have the perfect house. I'm living in paradise. Things shouldn't be like this, Just again, that sort of practical application to try to interpret the emotional world, and and unable to accept the emotional world because somehow in the practical world assessment, she has everything that she would need to make her happy, which a lot of the time is what people end up in therapy, because they get all these things and that they are told that are going to make them happy in the practical world, but it doesn't translate to emotional world, contentment, happiness, or connection.
That is exactly right. Because emotions are not the result of things. People think that becoming happy is a result. I got a raise. We can be momentarily happy about good things happening, but that it's like, if I get to that certain house, a certain this and a certain that, then I'll be happy because it's a result. It's not a result. It's a skill. Knowing how to feel confident in the emotional world is because of a kind of accumulation of skills, of knowing that I have what the other person needs if I can just be here. And no one, you hear me say this a lot, no one dies in the emotional world. Number one skill, being comfortable with the discomfort. I never signed up for this. It's like, actually you did. You may not have known it, but you did. Because to really know another human being and to experience all the phases of life is to know a great deal of discomfort as well as, joy. And joy exists, and it is also in the emotional world. But here's the funny thing, which is that very often joy is right in front of someone, and they don't recognize it because they don't know how to switch into the emotional world. It's not just that the emotional world is not just a place of hardship and how long is this going to take? It is where we have our emotions. Well, joy happens to be one of those emotions. And if I don't know how to switch into the emotional world, I can be at my daughter's wedding, being married to someone I really like and know it's going to be good, and I won't feel any joy. I might be one of those people during the weddings, kind of like, how long is this going to take? Wonder if I can get a phone call into the office before it closes back east. Okay. It's being present and knowing that you have what the other person needs. I don't have what the other person needs in the survival world. We go get somebody who really knows what they're doing. And for most practical things, I don't know what to do. I'm a therapist. So a review: survival world, immediate action; emotional world, immediate affirmation. And nobody dies. There's no emergency. The affirmation is like, I can see what you're experiencing, or I hear that you're unhappy with me right now, or I can see that you're really happy. And I'll talk to you about this in an hour because I've got to go. And I've got to go because nobody dies. Practical world, it's best when you can do it during business hours, by appointment. Do the practical world, when you're well rested and wide awake. Sometimes the practical world's like the survival world. The pipes in the wall break and suddenly you've got a fire drill. So you do things, you take immediate action. You don't say, oh, I'll call the plumber, on Monday morning when the house is 3 feet underwater. We don't do that. So a few guidelines, which is what takes care of one. So here's what takes care of one world will not take care of another world. And that sounds very simple to say, but it's like I say, if the only tool you got is that hammer, it's like you will pound away. The old definition of what is being crazy. Well, it's doing the same thing over and over, hoping for a different outcome.
And sometimes, John, that hammer could be something that you learned in your childhood by being modeled by your father, for example.
Almost always is.
Yeah.
All of us come to our intimate relationships with models for what we have dreams, but we have a model for how you do a relationship. Stephanie Brown's book, she's the daughter of an alcoholic. She wrote a book entitled "It'll Never Happen to Me." Well, what the kids of alcoholics do? Darn if they just don't grow up and marry an alcoholic. Not always. But it's like, I'll never do that. Oh, wait a minute. It's kind of like, wait a minute, I have the tools to handle an alcoholic. I don't actually have the tools to handle someone who has no problem with alcohol and no problem with addiction. I need to find somebody I'm going to save. I'll be like my mother and my father who was trying to save my mother and my father. So we go where our tools are. Okay. So what takes care of the practical world will not satisfy the needs of the emotional world. Once again, sorry, men. And what takes care of the emotional world will not be appropriate in the survival world. I always give it's a stupid example, but I give the example of a 2-year-old has fallen in the pool, the mother can't swim, and you walk up and say, wow, you must be really upset right now. You're watching your child go down for the 3rd time. This must be, you get your teeth handed to you. It's like, don't put your arm around me, jump in the pool, save my kid. That's right. Because later, when everybody's fine and the child's in mom's lap and you got a towel around the child and everything's calmed down, he said, wow, that must be one of the scariest things. Oh God, I've never been so scared all my life. You can switch into the emotional world then and process it. And survival world strategies and practical world strategies are not effective in the emotional world. Okay. And the key is the recognition of which world is present and understand the hierarchy. And survival world, you take action. Emotional world, you affirm. You have to take action right then, but one of you's about to get on an airplane to fly halfway across the country for an important meeting, and suddenly you get upset with each other or whatever, or you realize there's an emotional thing you need to talk about having to do with one of your relatives you're worried about. And you go, I'll call you from the hotel. You get to the airport, you're about to get on a plane. a really important meeting, and one of you gets word that the other one's parents have just been in a car wreck or a heart attack, it's like, you cancel the trip. Person needs you to be with them. You cancel. In the practical world. Yeah, some people, they have a really tough time being obedient to the practical world. They play on their computers all day long at work and things like that, get themselves in a lot of problems because they don't obey the practical world. And actually, the word obey here is a very good word. You know, obey the survival world is there. Well, if you really love someone and you're with someone you love, and obey the emotional world when it's there. And when it's time to go to work and do what you need to do in order to make everything work, well, then obey the practical world. In the emotional world, I have 3 questions I ask people when there's been a lot of emotional strife. And maybe a lot of anger's built up over the years, a lot of disillusionment. Maybe they're close to getting divorced, or ending the relationship. And of course, some relationships need to end. But I ask 3 questions, and they're not prejudicial questions. They're for the person to consider. They don't represent my values. They don't represent what I think the other person should do. The 3 questions are very simple. They're very profound, but they're simple. And the 3 questions are, do you want your partner to feel happy? Do you want your partner to feel loved? And do you want your partner to feel emotionally safe? If you look inside of you, can you find some part of you that, but I don't know how to do that. And we've been trying to do that for you. I said, that's not what I said. I said, is there some part of you inside of you that resonates with those questions? And yes, you really would like for that to be, for your partner to experience that. Well, I don't know. We've been at this a long time and I don't much give a damn anymore. That's not what I asked you. That's not what I ask you. I'm not trying to tell you what to do. I'm asking out of my own warm curiosity. Because if the answer to those 3 questions is no, it's like, well, that might be the dead fireplace. If somebody says, well, I've just been worn down and I'm just tired, and it's like, I don't think anybody would still be invested in a relationship with what I've gone through. That's like, that's not what I ask you. That's not what I ask you. I ask you, is there any part of you? Well, how about her? How about him? Shouldn't they care about me? It's like, I'm not asking that. I'm asking you, is there any part of you? Because the person says, yes, actually, I would really like that. Then I say, well, good. Then I can start teaching you about the emotional world, and I can start confronting you when you start using the tools of the other worlds when the emotional world is there. That's all. It's just it gives me permission to teach you a new language. But without your permission and any availability on your part, I can't teach it. You've got to be a little bit vulnerable for me to teach you about the world of being vulnerable. It's like, well, I'll do it if she does it, or I'll do it if he does it. It's like, that's not what I'm asking. I'm asking you, is this what you'd like for this other human being? And remember, there was a time when you couldn't wait to see this other human being. You couldn't wait to be on the phone. You couldn't wait to touch this person or kiss this person or hug this person or to share with this person the things that had happened in your day. Does any of that still exist? Well, I don't know. I think she's really messed the whole thing. That's not what I asked you. That's not what I asked you. Okay. So again, timing, survival world, immediate action, immediate recognition, immediate action. Emotional world, immediate affirmation. And timely action. It can be timely. I'll talk to you later. This sounds really important. Let's sit down later with a cup of coffee and talk about it. I got to go right this minute. I got to take the kids to school. And practical world, best anytime during working hours, except in those moments when, you just got to do what you got to do because life demands it. The essence, survival world is action. Action satisfies the survival world. It demands action because in the survival world, if it's really there will be an outcome. Remember, a lot of people in the emotional world, they're really upset. They're really in pain. And they say, we've got to take an action so that something terrible doesn't happen. Well, nobody does. You just feel like you're dying, but there is not an action you can take at that moment. You have to find another way to soothe yourself. A lot of people soothe themselves by being frantic and saying, and it's your fault. If you just did more, we wouldn't be here. And just all kinds of ways of trying to find the action to turn this into something that can have an outcome right now that I can see and is solvable. I just need to yell at you more or be more frustrated with you. And then you'll come up with energy to solve the problem. You'll fix it. It's like, no, the essence of the emotional world is process. It's hard to do process if the other one person sitting there going, it's like this, stone wall. And it's hard to do process if the other person's like screaming at you. Before I knew how to contain such things, in my early career, I would have people in my office and they'd just be screaming at each other. And I was like, I didn't know what to do. People in the building say, well, you had a real live couple today, didn't you? Because everybody in the building could hear it. But this is how we learn. Okay. And the practical world is content. Right? If the world is not recognized as a possibility of death or impairment, if the emotional world is not recognized, not affirmed, you can have emotional disconnection, even feelings of abuse or abandonment. There's a lot of talk about abuse, and appropriately so. And what's unfair in this world is that a woman can speak to a man with a much louder voice than a man can speak to a woman. Because the man with all of his testosterone and his body size usually and things like that, when he starts talking with a loud voice, it kind of gets abusive, and a woman can be pretty loud and really not be abusive. But be that as it may, just as painful in a relationship is feeling abandoned. The person who's going to the survival role say, well, I get it out on the table. At least I express myself. And the guy who's sitting here saying, well, I don't want things getting out of hand. So I just shut up and wait for things to pass. It's like, I just abandoned you. I just removed myself. Oh, my body's sitting here, but I just removed myself from your emotional distress. And I've removed myself. I've abandoned you. And I got to tell you, for those of you listening to this tape who have issues around having been abandoned in some form or another when you were growing up, you know what I'm talking about. It really hurts to be abandoned. I didn't abandon her. I just didn't want things to get out. Yes, you did. Yeah, you did. You left the emotional world. You didn't stay there with that person.
Yeah, John, I just want to take a pause there because that's so powerful what you're saying. And just for the audience here, really just wanting, like if you have come from a non-responsive, non-reliable, unsafe family environment, where abandonment or rejection or betrayal had played out, and you're noticing that some version of that showing up in your relationship, this is where you need support and you need help in a way to be able to find your way to be able to work through these feelings of abandonment. Either you're abandoning the other, reenacting something, or you're being abandoned, for example. There's help, there's professional help available for that. And what advice could you say to someone, John, for someone who might have come from a family where it wasn't responsive or reliable or safe, and they're listening to this, and they're noticing, saying, yeah, I feel this disconnection, I'm feeling this abuse and abandonment in their emotional world. What would be something that would be a couple of steps? What would be the movements if you were able to acknowledge that?
You keep coming up with the great questions. Yes. I don't know an easy answer to what Nigel just asked me. It's knowing that the emotional world does exist, knowing that it is possible to feel safe and loving, not just loved, but loving in that world, and that there are ways to reach deeper levels of intimacy. And like any journey, if you decide to embark on this journey, I mean, everything, by the way, I came from what has to be called a very nice family. I never saw anybody have a fight, so it was a pretty emotionally closed down family, but very nice. There was no trauma. And everything I'm teaching you in this lecture, I've learned since leaving home. Okay? So you too can learn it. And your main friend in this process is curiosity. You know, I ask my type A guys sometimes to ask themselves when they're getting upset about some minor thing. I invite them. How would someone with good self-esteem handle this situation? You can ask yourself, how would someone handle this situation if they believed in their own power to have influence and believed in their ability to be curious? You know, when we begin a journey, it takes us to a new place. And sometimes the people we love, they come along that journey with us. And sometimes they don't. And sometimes people get really interested in knowing about the emotional world and how to live a life that is not connected to the abuse or the abandonment of their childhood. And we can't make the people we love come on the same journey. But here's another thing that's one of the major essences of the emotional world, because I can't point a gun at somebody and say, be in the emotional world. Oh, they'll be scared to death, but that's not being in the emotional world. They'll be in the survival world. Well, there's something, the famous bank robber, somebody said, why rob banks? He said, because that's where the money is. Well, he also said that he found that he could get a lot more from somebody with a kind comment and a gun than he could with just a kind comment. All right. So the emotional world is invitational. It's invitational. What's an invitation into? It's the invitation into the warmth that I'm discovering that I have. And I'm discovering that maintaining that warmth and feeling that warmth and expressing that warmth is more important to me than scoring points or being right or proving you wrong. It's not uncommon at all for one person to move more than other people. But then you invite, just like if you actually have an ancestor who discovered this little portion of what's now West Virginia, and he went back and he married a woman, invited her to come into it, and he invited his friends to come into this beautiful area. It was an invitation. And the emotional world is invitational. Practical world is like, not so invitational. You have a job you don't like, but it pays the bill, so there you are. And when survival world appears, it's kind of like, not right now. Thanks for the invitation, but I don't want to have a heart attack right now. But thank you anyway. It's like, no. Okay. So let me get out of that because I'm about to quit here. I can talk about this, as we say in West Virginia, till the cows come home.
Great, John. Another thing as I'm sitting here, I'm trying to imagine these three worlds. Would you say that when one can acknowledge these three worlds and have a sense of them and an ability to move between them, that that's a sign of maturity on some level?
Yes, if maturity is the maturation of one's character and learning, I mean, learning what you need to know in order to feel competent. A lot of people spend way too much time at work. The reason they do is because they feel competent there. They feel competent. Why are they competent? Well, very often people feel really well trained, and so they get a kind of respect, and that feels good. And other people, they kind of live their lives always in the survival world, just stirring things up, just always from up because it's actually kind of comfortable for them. And it's like, it's different to say, oh, you know what? I feel competent to love other people and to love myself. I actually I feel confident in my ability to love other people. And if you understand that, then the emotional world shows up. It's like that 97%. It's like, the only thing I actually have to do is to stay here with you. And from your experience, Nigel, that for an awful lot of people, the first time someone ever talked to someone who could really stay with them emotionally and handle the anxiety of that is when they come to see us. Because before that, they grew up in environments where the discomfort of the emotional world either caused everybody to shut down or everybody to blow up. But not just go like, oh, this is okay. This is normal. It's all right. There's no five-alarm fire taking place here. This is normal. This is life. We'll get to the other side of it. Oh, and when we get to the other side of it, we'll be better off. We'll know each other more.
I can't help it. I kind of feel this fire at my feet at the moment, John, because just for the viewers out here, because this is like a revolution in a way. Like I feel that's important for me to just keep reframing and I want you to check in to see if I'm on point here, John.
Yeah.
And it's this possibility of where you can change a sort of your inflated personality in some way that's over adapting in one area. And there's an opportunity for you to discover who you really are. Like some of your best parts of self could reside in that emotional landscape. That, and like just again for the viewers, you're maybe on your second cup of tea right now or coffee, just to really, like, how does that feel to be able to step into getting to know yourself more, and then to be able to discover some of your best parts that you haven't even known exists yet. Like, to me, that's the fire beneath me that I'm starting to, as I put myself into my own shoes, but also the shoes of the listener, to know like that is possible with this particular work.
Well, that's right. I mean, that's right. It's where the goodies are. It's where the satisfaction and joy and the,
And then another part that's coming in for the therapists watching, this is moving away from epistemological understanding of interpretation and meaning to more ontological, where it's being and becoming. It's this feeling of accompanying the other, this movement towards the other, the sort of helping the client, which you said, John, as they come in and experience this normalization and this hard and this maybe solid ground that they may not have experienced in their childhood, to the viewer listening, to know that, again, like going to a professional, a psychotherapist or transactional analyst, or entering into a group. These are wonderful spaces to have experiments of living, to discover what John was talking about. And also, I think getting this book, Aspiring to Kindness, is a wonderful compass to help you navigate knowing these particular these sort of worlds in a way that, as a therapist who's been through multiple trainings, the way that you put it together, John, makes it very digestible.
Good. That's good to know. That's really good to know.
For the stupid, or the sort of, I'm not a very sort of analytical minded person, although I do come out with a couple of big words here and there. But really, I can see how, for the public, this could be this is a really lovely tool to help them find love and kindness, and to be able to experience it possibly as well.
Yeah. So I'm going to wrap up, because I can talk about this, like I said, till because I love talking about this subject. I will talk to you again shortly, my friend, and I will talk about the three kinds of relationships that can exist in the emotional world. The emotional world based on love, on choice, on commitment. And then in that, and everybody dreams that it's going to be their dream relationship that they dream of, which are usually pretty good images, except they're not based in much reality. So that there are three types of relationships in the emotional world. And they are healing, which is like the gold standard. I mean, who doesn't want to have a healing relationship? Limp along. My parents were a limp along, very friendly to each other, pretty much, but a limp along relationship. And then destructive. And any of you who grew up in homes where there was raging, there was schizophrenia, where there was alcoholism, you know what I'm talking about when I say relationships that are destructive. And they're on a spectrum, and you can move, but you got to know them. And I'm happy to talk about those three relationships and how to transition toward healing.
Wow. Wow. So we go deeper. So now we get to through this sort of the three worlds, we get to be able to have a classification and identification to these worlds and ideas and ways to be able to understand when one is in one. And now what we're going to, in a week or a couple of weeks' time, we'll step into a deeper definition of the emotional world, and then how to move towards healing as opposed to the destructive parts or ambivalence.
Yeah,
Well,
it's the journey from misery to contentment.
I think that's a lovely place for us to end here.
If
anybody would like to move from misery to contentment, watch this again and then be ready for another helping coming anytime soon. So thank you so much. Thank you, John.
My pleasure, always.